Addis Business Talk with Khalid and Marid on Afro FM 105.3. We'll be talking to policymakers, investors, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to bring you the latest development taking place in the Ethiopian economic and business climate, and more importantly, what it means to you. Our discussions will be held, of course, with Her Excellency Dr. Fitsum Assefa, the Commissioner at the Planning and Development Commission. The topic of discussion will revolve around the 10-year Prospective Development Plan, introduced, of course, back in June of this year, and looking to promote quality growth and to make Ethiopia a model of prosperity for Africa. Your Excellency, a big welcome to you, and thank you for accepting to join us here on Addis Business Talk.
Thank you very much for having me on Addis Business Talk.
Excellent. So as we often begin with an introductory question, Your Excellency, if you can please tell us about your background, your upbringing, your academic and professional experience, and how you made it to the prestigious position of being Commissioner at the Planning and Development Commission.
Good question to start with. Yeah, I'm firstborn to a family of 5, civil servant father, a moderate family, an amazing mother, a housewife. Hawassa is my hometown. Went to Addis Ababa University for undergrad as well as postgrad, master's in fact, and then did my PhD in Germany. How I made it to this position is a bit tricky, considering that I was not such active in the political arena, but there were incidents that allowed me to meet, few these political leaders on different platforms. But I think most of it is explained by the change in the government. Just like the other cabinet positions, I am the result of the commitment by His Excellency the Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, and the whole reform to bring new blood, professionals to such positions. Yeah.
Excellent, Your Excellency, and thank you for joining us on the show. So let's talk. Your office is taking a great initiative to develop a 10-year development plan that aspires to make Ethiopia a beacon of prosperity in Africa. Tell us the strategic development goals and areas of focus behind the plan, and what are the main identified strategic pillars identified by your commission. And perhaps if you could explain what are the main reasons and justification preparing this plan.
Yeah, sure. To start with, the strategic development goals, considering the huge backlog in terms of development, in terms of the number of population living under poverty line, the main strategic goal is to keep this country growing in high growth trajectory of about 10.2% on average for the coming 10 years. But again, this growth should be quality growth in the sense that it should reduce poverty in all its dimensions, not only consumption and income poverty, but all dimensions. And so we projected, poverty level of less than 7% by 2030. And at the same time, this growth, this development should bring, enough decent jobs so that the unemployment rate should reduce to less than 9% by 2030. Of course, it should be inclusive in the process as well as in outcome of the development, to say the least. Again, per capita income is projected to grow by 8.2% annually, and Ethiopia will definitely enter the middle income countries by 2030 with 2,248 US dollars. The growth should also bring about macroeconomic stability as opposed to, our experience from GDP to performance, where, the way we financed our growth, our development really resulted in huge macroeconomic instability. So with this growth, the country's economy should ensure structural change and be on the right track to structural transition. Other goals, equally important goals, also include universal access to electricity and clean water, both in urban and rural settings, and achieve, in fact, the globally subscribed SDG targets in all related human development areas. So these are some of the major strategic goals. In fact, there are lots which I didn't mention for the sake of time. In fact, the focus areas again really align with the goals that I just mentioned. You know, the growth sources, if you have to create decent jobs, if you have to create quality growth, the growth sources matter. You know, Ethiopian growth for the last 10 years has been, you know, strong, in fact, but it has been criticized for the lack of quality, and the source of growth has been investment in public, you know, infrastructure projects. So because of that, the growth doesn't have that quality to withstand shocks. And also it was jobless, and it created macroeconomic instability. So the growth sources matter. So the focus areas as source of growth this time around would be agriculture, manufacturing industry, mining, tourism, and ICT, these 5 sectors. Again, we have the enablers, so sustainable development finance, which relies mostly on internal sources of finance, which you know, speaks to the, you know, the income, the taxes and the income that the economy generates, and also the efficiency gains that we should get from really avoiding, you know, cost and time run of projects as we implement our development initiatives. And also, in fact, resource mobilization, saving, and financial inclusion, and also other enablers, including energy, roads, and the logistics sector. Human capital development and institutional transformation are some of the focus areas, like in this strategic plan or the 10-year perspective plan. The main identified strategic pillars for the plan, in fact, there are economic related strategic pillars as well as institutional related strategic pillars. There are about 10 pillars. I will just run through them. Ensure quality economic growth and shared prosperity is one of the pillars. The second one is improve productivity and competitiveness, because that's the area we really fail when it comes to, you know, the performances we had the last 10, 15 years. Our economy is still in low productivity as well as less competitive when compared to other economies. The other one is building technological capacity and digital economy. So we can't miss out in the, you know, the fourth industrial revolution, which is definitely going to be digital.
Yes.
And technological capacity should be built so that our growth, our development is sustainable and long-term. And the fourth one is undertake institutional transformation. That's also the area where we really fail big. In fact, we haven't built enough institutions, and also we have destroyed the existing institutions as well in the process. And so institutional transformation is a must if we have to really achieve the goals that we have set. Ensuring sustainable development finance is the other strategic pillar. The sixth one is ensure private sector leadership in the economy. In fact, GTP2 also says, you know, private sector is the growth engine in the economy, but it didn't happen that way. Our private sector is still infant and has lots of problems, bottlenecks. So this time around, the private sector definitely should lead, you know, the growth, the investment in the economy, because most of the investment is expected from the private sector this time around, unlike previous time where most of the investment was made by the public or the government. The seventh one is build resilient green economy. Green economy, we had it before also, but our economy should also be resilient to any shock.
Yes.
See COVID, for instance, how our economy responded to COVID, how the global economy, in fact, responded to COVID and other shocks, that might materialize, while implementing this plan. So our economy should be resilient to such shocks, and it should be green. So that's the seventh. The eighth one is ensuring inclusive development. Our development, our implementation of the plan should be inclusive in process as well as in the outcome. So inclusive in terms of gender, inclusive, in terms of the young generation, where, more than 70% of our population is less than 30 years old. Unless it really is inclusive enough, it won't really result in the development and the prosperity that we aspire. And also inclusive in terms of, disability, in terms of regions which were left behind, in the last 10, 15 years, implementation of our development plans. So our development should be inclusive. So that's why we bring this as a strategic pillar. The ninth one is building access to justice and effective good governance. In our previous plans, we took this as underlying assumptions. If plans should be properly implemented and goals should be achieved, we should have, access to justice, effective justice system, effective good governance. But, GTP2, when we see GTP2, these things didn't materialize. That's why most of the targets and the goals were not achieved. So we have to put it as a strategic pillar, so that we can put goals for that, we can put targets, and we can follow it up with specific key performance indicators. So we have to do it by design. It won't happen if we assume it, it should be planned. So we have brought it as one of the strategic pillars. The last one is ensuring sustainable peace and regional economic integration. Peace used to be assumed before, but it didn't happen, GDP2, if you see the years, the last 3-4 years, peace didn't happen as assumed.
Yes.
So we have to work towards it. We have to work, we have to set goals, we have to put strategies and indicators, as I've said earlier. So these are the 10 strategic pillars that are set out in our 10-year perspective plan. Yes, I think I have answered the questions. Yes.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. I think, thank you for that elaborative answer. I think you covered it all. I think from what I've understood is that from your initial announcement of 6 pillars, I think you added 4 pillars, and you tried to address the main key challenge of the not only the economy aspect but also the social political aspect as well. I think this is very interesting, and as something we look forward to seeing it in the next decade. So I'm glad that you mentioned GTP, the Growth and Transformation Plan. As you know, many scholars and policymakers criticize the previous 2 GTP plans by mentioning it is too ambitious and lack accountability and lacks a strong monitoring and evaluation system. From your perspective, when you formulate this plan, tell us what kind of monitoring and evaluation system do you put in place, and how you plan to follow up. And if we are in 2030, after 10 years, what would be the success indicators of this 10-year strategic plan?
Yeah. As you rightly mentioned, I completely agree that we lacked accountability and strong monitoring and evaluation system while implementing GTP2. In terms of ambitiousness, of course, scholars from different school of thought, think differently when it comes to plans. Should it be ambitious? But plans should be ambitious, adequately ambitious, as long as they are informed by really proper study, proper rigorous exercises. But, it shouldn't be just some arbitrary figures put on, the plan as targets, because on GTP2, some of the numbers, as you mentioned, are really way out of, the Ethiopian context at that moment. But most of the weaknesses really happen in the monitoring and evaluation system that was put in place, if there was at all, one. Now, the monitoring and evaluation system that we're putting in place really required us a whole shift of the M&D landscape from process and activity-based to result-based monitoring and evaluation system, which really requires a whole shift of, again, culture. In our country, there is low appetite for monitoring and evaluation results. And also there is huge resistance from both the government and other implementers, in terms of using monitoring and evaluation results as well as being monitored and evaluated, in the first place. So this shift really required legal frameworks. So new regulations were enacted by the Council of Ministers, which really gives legal backing to planning and development commissions really to do the effective monitoring and evaluation system, and also which really helped the shift towards the monitoring, the result-based monitoring and evaluation system. Again, the shift to result-based monitoring and evaluation system again requires shift on the indicators that we use to monitor and evaluate performances. In that regard, we, when we launched studies to inform this 10-year perspective plan, simultaneously we launched several studies to assess the monitoring and evaluation landscape in the country, other country experiences, benchmarking, and so we came up with key result area and key performance indicator document, which sets out all the indicators which really measure results instead of processes and really activities, as as we used to under the GTP2 era. So again, we have huge problem in terms of activities in silos by ministries. For instance, several ministries needed to work together, needed to collaborate if those ambitious goals have to be achieved, but it didn't happen again. So collaborations shouldn't be based on only willingness. It should be legally binding. So one way to do that is really set out key result areas and key performance indicators which ensure joint accountability. So ministries will be accountable for collaborating or not collaborating, so such kind of shifts. And again, this monitoring and evaluation system should be modern and accessible to data users, interested, citizens. So for that, again, we have to work on digitizing the whole monitoring and reporting platform. So I don't know if you have followed the news on our launching of digital monitoring and reporting platform, the presence of the Deputy Prime Minister. So that platform will definitely ensure accountability, will ensure accessibility of information, ensure modern, timely, and really real-time monitoring and evaluation system. So these are the things that we are trying to do in terms of, installing proper, effective monitoring and evaluation system, as you mentioned earlier. Yes. And the key success indicators, of course, you mentioned, the success indicators on our GTP2 were economic heavy. And when you talk to an ordinary citizen, a random citizen, and say we have really registered 10% economic growth, that person should relate to that 10% and should say, yes, we have really registered 10% and I'm feeling it. So for that, we never had such, human-centered success indicators. We just measured GDP, we just measured per capita income, which really averages out all the imperfections in all our systems. So this time around, our success indicators have shifted a lot, and this is a huge departure from our previous experience. And we have the Human Development Index, globally accepted, with all the indicators which are human-centered indicators. We have the Multidimensional Poverty Index, which includes indicators which measure poverty not only in terms of income and consumption, but also other accesses for clean water, access to roads, access to education, and also, in fact, other political, social participation related indicators. So again, this is not also enough. We also have perception of well-being indexes, because now countries are measuring, happiness indexes. So, citizens can be rich in terms of, money, can really be better off in terms of those indicators, but their well-being, their perception of their own well-being also matters. The happiness level, the sense of security they have, the feeling they have toward this, the perception they have toward this government services, public services also matters. So that's why we have the perception of well-being indexes as additional success indicators. So this is, again, big departure from our experience in terms of success indicators. Yeah.
Wonderful, Your Excellency. I think it's very commendable that much attention is now being paid towards performance evaluation and the collaborative element between ministries to be able to perform on this plan and then be held accountable along the way is something I think that should be encouraged, and definitely some learned lessons from the previous strategic plans that were devised. And I also find it impressive that these indicators come both from an indigenous source, but also a number of international ones that many global and multinational organizations have deemed to be very important to monitor performance in this social economic strategic plans that countries devise. So definitely well done on that. And also thank you for laying out these strategic pillars in a very comprehensive way. It sort of looks to me that one of the most important primary focus areas, and definitely a common denominator of the plan, at least in terms of outcome, is the creation of jobs. It's a very important matter for Ethiopia. Some of the numbers show that over 20 million people are unemployed. About 2 million people are joining the labor force annually. My question is, how is your good office planning to achieve its plan to be able to create decent jobs for Ethiopia in the next 10 years?
Yeah, very good question there. As you rightly mentioned, there is huge backlog in terms of, unemployment, both urban and rural, in fact, and again, couple of millions entering the market every year. So this will be one of the major focus areas that, we'll be dealing with coming 10 years. How it is to be achieved should be planned clearly, and the focus areas, when I mentioned earlier, the huge shift in the focus areas as a growth sources are really known for their job creation. For instance, take the manufacturing sector. It's one of the focus areas in the coming 10 years. So again, you have tourism, known for hiring lots of people in the whole value chain, and also we have the modern sector, the ICT. We have not touched it yet, so we will definitely have ICT supported globalized services, which will hire lots of these young people already unemployed, and as well entering the job market in the coming 10 years. So, but still we have to put strategy, how to ensure this, focuses this source of growth, these sectors, these focus areas create enough jobs, create decent jobs. One of the KPIs, one of the key performance indicators for government offices, implementing organs, is the job creation, not only the number, but the quality of job that they created along the way, implementing their plan. That's one important indicator. So they will be evaluated along those lines. Another one is, as I mentioned earlier, most of the growth sources I mentioned here really pertain to, the inherent nature of the private sector. Government won't be investing in manufacturing industries, won't be investing in tourism, ICT, in the sense that maybe it creates enabling environment, but it won't be investing much in this area. So again, the incentive package for the private sector will be put in place based on their performances on job creation and export performance, among other things. So job creation will be one of the top performance evaluation and factors to really give incentive package for an investor, for a private company, in dealing with such companies from the government side. So this will ensure creation of adequate quality jobs. In addition to that, there are auxiliary documents. One of the departures in this 10-year perspective plan is we won't be just putting the framework and that technical, document as a plan, but we'll prepare auxiliary documents supporting this plan. One of it is the human resource requirement and the skills agenda. So this is one of the documents that we have started working on in collaboration with the Job Creation Commission, where, we really set out, the strategies on how to create enough jobs, how to coordinate these all efforts into creating adequate, decent jobs, and also really upskill the already existing unemployed labor force, because, paradoxically enough, we have huge unemployment. At the same time, some of industries, for instance, industrial parks and outside industrial parks, complain about shortage of skilled labor. So such things will be definitely included in the auxiliary document along with the strategies. So job creation is one of the big agenda on the table. So yes, we'll deal with it in such a way. We'll work out detailed action plan. We'll really put responsible organs for all, and we'll put KPIs. So yeah, we'll do it that way.
Great, Dr. Fitsum. I think I'm personally glad to hear that not only the government is focusing on the creation of jobs, but also the quality of jobs, because most of our young people would be pleased to listen this. I think it is in the consideration of in the government's eyes. And I can't wait to read the food document. As you know, as a country, as a most populous country in Africa and the most biggest country, we have every variable for successful development in terms of economical development. We have the biggest population, big demography dividend, and big geography, right? So all these things coming together, we have a great potential to be one of the most regional players in the next, I would say, in the next few years, or not only few years, but also this century as well, considering our demography our population will grow up to 280 million before this century is out, right? So my question is, when we are taking this kind of grandiose initiative or plan, one of the things we seems to like as a country is that the public arm the public infrastructure in terms of its capacity, in terms of human capacity in public service, in terms of capacity in resource mobilization, capital allocation, project execution, which I think the Prime Minister was addressing it in the Parliament, in terms of we lack proper project execution. Having these great plans and putting it on the ground, it is one thing we lack in terms of on the public infrastructure side. How do you plan to address the capacity gap, both on the federal government and the regional government level?
Yeah, you perfectly, put the challenge that we face and that we have to really straighten up if we have to achieve those goals. One
Absolutely.
of the performance evaluation results from our previous plan implementation clearly revealed, the failure of the government in establishing, the whole political economy, which creates enabling environment for the, the developmental state way of doing things, as the previous administration claims to have implemented. But as you said, we have failed in the human capacity, project execution, setting out the whole civil service, which really married to the everyday political nitty-gritty, the whole bureaucracy, way of financing our projects, and project execution capacity. So these all are, the challenge that we have at hand and we have to address, in fact. So for that, one of the focus areas in our development plan is still the human capital development. In that regard, we have to invest in human capital, the capacity in that sense, in terms of education, health. It's not only the, the education that we provide in terms of access, but quality education, which really is relevant to the market, the requirement of the market, the requirement of the investments that we are attracting at the moment, and also the civil service itself, in terms of creating, ease of doing business. We have to create, civil service which is based on meritocracy, not, political appointments, not, which really is busy with everyday political, as I've said earlier, political routines. So it must be merit-based, and also they should deliver services. So it requires huge civil service reform. That's why one of the strategic pillars is access to justice and effective good governance. When we say access to justice, it's not only these criminal-related justices, but it also relates to the administrative justices that really creates enabling environment to the business to flourish, enabling environment to the, the doing business environment and the investment environment of the country. And also financing, as you mentioned, we have this closed economy. Our financial system is so closed that it's really difficult to access, for instance, foreign capital for our private sector. And again, other alternative sources like equity financing. We don't have capital markets and other ways of financing, other modalities of financing our development plans. But this time around, especially with the implementation of the homegrown economic reform. So one of the sections, the components in the homegrown economic reform is the reform in the finance sector. So we'll definitely be opening up, even if gradually, but between now and opening up, there are lots of things that we can do in terms of really expanding the financing sources, the financing or alternative. For instance, creating capital market, establishing capital market is one, and also other sources of financing, like, for instance, allowing the diaspora to engage in the finance sector, in the banking sector, and also rural finance, to be inclusive, and also, again, creating joint ventures, and also with, the private sector, the public-private partnership. This all, new way of doing things will definitely increase, the financing related problems. I can really mention the innovative way of financing that the Prime Minister used in his flagship projects of the Toto, the Shaggar Park, the Unity Park. If you take Toto, for instance, lots of private sector is operating, but it is completely new way of financing the whole project. In fact, the government did, the infrastructure, because that's, the role of the government. But when you see the investments, it's in the partnership with the private sector, it's a whole new way of partnering with the private sector, a whole new way of attracting new capital into, such projects. So such kind of new things will definitely come into operation as we go along. At the same time, project execution, as you mentioned earlier, we are really, really poor in that regard. It relates to, the accountability. It relates to the project appraisal, that system we have, the legal framework. So it's so structural that it requires, lots of work, and it might not go away in like few years down the road. But, we have started, lots of work in that regard. For instance, you can consider the proclamation that was issued by the Parliament, which was presented by the Planning and Development Commission, the commission that I lead, which really gives the legal framework on the public investment management. So all projects from this year onwards cannot be, budgeted unless Planning and Development Commission does appraisal of the project in all the dimensions: economic, environment, social, whether the source of financing is sustainable, whether there is in fact source of financing for that project, if that project aligns with the country's, development direction, whether that's a priority or can be done maybe later in the years. So projects will be appraised on those, lines, and then only Minister of Finance will allocate budget for that project. So it all starts from, setting out proper legal framework. Then still that legal framework can only correct maybe 50% of the problem. Capacity of the project owners, government offices in executing the projects, in contract, administration, following monitoring and evaluation. This all needs lots of work. So we are on the right track towards that, but the reform works that we're undertaking, from policy till way of doing things, are addressing the problem that we have in terms of project execution. And again, the motivation that the projects that the Prime Minister have implemented, created in the whole country, really are not to be undermined. If I start a new project, maybe in my office, I will always remember, the time, the quality, and the way the projects were executed by the Prime Minister. So I will definitely be working to achieve, such, excellence in executing projects that I own. And all other federal offices as well as regions will follow suit, but it won't happen just if we just sit, but we should plan for that. We should bring regional governments on board. We should try to roll out legal frameworks. We should do capacity building works to regions as well as federal implementing organs, if we have to really achieve the goals that we have set out in our 10-year perspective plan. And again, another auxiliary document, just like the human resource requirement and the skills agenda, we are preparing public investment plan to identify driver projects that the government should undertake if, projects, if goals that we set on our strategic plan should be achieved. So that public investment plan identifies potentials in all the regions, development corridors, and where should the government focus in the coming 10 years as priority areas, and that should be planned accordingly. So we have that separate auxiliary document, detailed document, which plans the public investment for the coming 10 years. Yeah.
Excellent, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for that comprehensive and optimistic overview. Definitely worth knowing that some innovative and tangible measures have been taken to solve some of our key challenges in the past. And I'm glad you mentioned and raised about private sector leadership. I wanted to drill down about the private sector, which, as you've mentioned earlier, although nascent, is showing some growth, as we know today. Most of the country's recent development model, again, you've raised this earlier, was based on a big push strategy driven by large public spending. But now it seems that the private sector is being handed the steering wheel to drive the economy forward. If you can just tell us how your institution is planning to enhance this private sector engagement in the economy in the coming years, and how that role that will be upheld by the private sector will now change considerably going forward.
Yeah, excellent question. As you said earlier, there are encouraging results in private sector development in the country. But still our private sector is, in really infant stage, we can say, because it's just 30 or less years old in the first place. But the way we really handled the private sector development the last, how many years was not fair, to be honest, in terms of developing that sector and in terms of enabling that sector play its important role in the country, in the country's economy. To start with, how we engaged the private sector in the process of really crafting this plan. We never had that chance to be really open to the private sector, open to really even experts who say we have, we have an idea on how to do these things. We have an idea on, on the way you are doing things, on your plan, on your goals. But this time around, to be honest, we have been, open to the private sector in the process of planning. We have established Private Sector Advisory Council just for the purpose of giving input on the planning that we have, on the plan that we have been crafting. In addition to that, in the process of public consultation, on all the consultations that we have undertook, we have invited the private sector actors in all the areas. For instance, when we have presented the 10-year plan for the tourism sector, for instance, key private sector players in that sector were given the plan, read the plan between lines and really commented on and gave input on how this plan should be crafted, should be corrected, how some of the things should be given priority. Yes, so we have engaged the private sector in the process of crafting this plan. That was one thing. But the most important thing is the plan really sets target or a goal as like investment in the coming 10 years will average 37% of the GDP. And most of this investment comes from the private sector. So the government, when it says the private sector will be true leader in the economy, is not saying just for the sake of saying or for to do favor to the private sector, but because the promises that the government is making to the citizens can only then going to the last point in terms of the private sector engagement and how we really want to enhance the engagement of the private sector in the economy for the coming 10 years. In addition to the points that I mentioned earlier, these sectors that we are putting as focus areas, as source of growth for the coming 10 years can only be done by the private sector. Maybe the government will create enabling environment, invest in infrastructure, and also, avail financing and other enabling environment for these investments to happen. But most of the investment is going to come from the private sector. So private sector will truly lead the economy. But again, as I have said earlier, the private sector is so infant in the country. It really needs reinventing the private sector. The way we handled the private sector the last 10, 15 years was not really fair. So we need to do proper planning on the private sector development. So the Planning and Development Commission have already started working on private sector development strategy, which will be developed and really discussed with all stakeholders, with all actors, and finally be presented to the Council of Ministers for approval. So unless we plan to develop the private sector, especially the domestic private sector, and at the same time, the interface between the domestic private sector and the foreign direct investment that we are planning to attract for the coming 10 years, and unless we have that clear plan to manage that interface, it won't happen. So we'll be crafting private sector development strategy, and we'll soon be starting consultation on that document.
Addis Business Talk